What I found when I started looking at the history of how we got to where we are today is that you see that a lot of the things that have been done by businesses have really been destructive forces in terms of our belief in democracy as a governing system. So we've kind of brought ourselves to a point where, wittingly or unwittingly, where we are in danger of losing Western democracy. And that's a problem for business. That's just not a problem for the voter. It's a problem for business leaders.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
It's Seniors Month across much of Canada, and as we celebrate older adults' contributions, transportation remains one of the biggest barriers to independence for people as they age. That's where Uber senior accounts can help. Accounts that are designed to make getting around easier, more intuitive, and more accessible for older adults. With larger text, clearer steps, and fewer buttons, it helps make requesting rides more intuitive and less confusing. Senior accounts are part of Uber's Family Profiles feature, allowing loved ones to help set up an account and offer support when needed. For older adults who prefer to ride independently, Uber also has a feature called Simple Mode, which offers the same streamlined experience, no family profile required. For more information, visit Uber Family Profiles online, and thanks so much to Uber for supporting The Amber Mac Show. Welcome to The Amber Mac Show. Coming up in today's episode, Jeff and I are going to dive into social media bans that are underway around the world and how we can keep kids safer online.
Plus, we're also going to talk to the author of a new book that unpacks how business leaders can embrace radical trust, fairness in action, and collective intelligence. And we'll talk to one of the companies making the AI revolution possible. But first, let's get to the latest news.
As a smart home adopter, I know that one of the most important things to consider when introducing new tech in my house is to make sure all my devices play nicely together. With TP-Link's Tapo ecosystem, I love that I can add compatible products over time, knowing it will be a seamless experience for my whole family. Whether I'm looking for smart plugs, smart cameras, smart bulbs, smart switches, lighting, or other smart devices, TP-Link's Tapo ecosystem has me covered. All the products work seamlessly together with automation and security top of mind. To learn more about the Tapo ecosystem to make your home smarter, visit TP-Link online. And thanks to TP-Link for supporting the Amber Mac Show.
Headlines.
There's been so much news lately focused on social media bans and the like, not to mention a lot of related conversations that are happening on social media, that Jeff and I wanted to do a segment focusing on this topic. Here in Canada, our government recently announced Bill C-34, which is the Safe Social Media Act, and the most recent country to put in place social media restrictions for young people at the time we recorded this is the United Kingdom. But both countries are joining an increasing number of regions that are trying to put legislation in place that will protect youth from digital harms, ranging from social media to AI chatbots and more.
And this all started with Australia, whose December 2025 ban was the first in the world. So a lot of people have been using that as a reference point. And Australia's legislation has been the subject of a lot of criticism since they basically forced the major social media companies to lock out access for youth under 16. And they claim that that's removed almost 5 million social media accounts so far, but it's seen by a lot as being a bit of a blunt instrument, and they didn't give a lot of time to prepare for it. And even with those efforts that they made, it's still estimated that about 60% of kids in Australia who previously had social media accounts still have some access to social media accounts. So it's not perfect, but it's a first mover kind of thing. So hopefully something we can learn from.
I think that's a really great point to bring up, that it is not necessarily perfect and also not the same as what is being planned here in Canada. I do want to say that one of the biggest points of criticism about any of these moves to date seems to be around the privacy implications of age verification. But I have to say, there's definitely some incoherency on some of these arguments, with people claiming things like this means uploading your government identification directly to the social media companies. And how could you ever trust them with that information? Which would be a fair point, except for the fact that that is not how age verification should be done.
Absolutely. And, so if if we're approaching it that way, we're doing age verification wrong. In fact, I did the other Max segment on this a while back. If people want to check that out for some background, it covers a bunch of points about age verification, but it closes with the fact that the obviously the best approach now for age verification is to use a trusted third party service. So that means that social media companies or AI companies or whoever we're checking the ID for, they never need to see your government identification. They just get a yes or a no response to the question of whether a user is above a given age. And before the third party then safely destroys the data used to answer that question. So that is the proper way to do it. And I hope that's the way it's going to be done in the situations we're going to be seeing happen with all these countries as they seem to climb on board for this movement to do age verification for social media.
And we should mention that here in Canada, we have a pretty obvious third party option for this by leveraging Canada Post Identity Plus services, which are used for business services and even for voting, and which comply with all the necessary regulations here in Canada. So I think it's important mentioning that because we don't have to reinvent the wheel in its
Mhm.
entirety here. There are also other large vendors around the world for these kinds of services. So there are options in other countries. And as you just mentioned, the important thing is that these verification companies can be trusted with your private information and that they take the necessary steps to ensure that your data is immediately used for verification, a message sent to the social media or AI company that needs your age verified, but then that your personal data is securely deleted. And that is, again, the most important point.
Absolutely. And so it's a fear that is, it's well founded if you did it wrong, but there are ways to do it correctly. And I think, we trust in technology to deliver so many different solutions for things. The notion that we couldn't take care of this in a technologically safe manner for our data, I think that's a little far fetched. We can definitely do that. And I think that it's also important that people reflect on the fact that there are many instances in everyday life that require age verification, like buying liquor or cigarettes, getting onto a plane, going into a casino, even going to see a restricted movie. You have to show somebody your ID. So there's a lot of precedent for that concept. And you know, even in Alberta, a place that's not usually very friendly to federal liberal legislation, there are liquor stores where they don't just visually inspect your ID, they swipe it through a digital reader, and people accept all these things and trust that there's a way to do it right. And keeping with online age verification, even U.S. states like Florida and Texas have age verification laws for social media underway, along with a ton of states and other countries which use age verification laws to restrict access to pornography online. So, this ship has already sailed. We just need to make sure it stays afloat long enough that we get to our destination intact.
It's a really good point, and I think this is where we're seeing failures in these conversations, where there is a lack of literacy in terms of what we already have in place, what has been tried, what is being used, and we should also mention that there are alternatives as well, like AI age estimation based on analyzing a user's face. Listen, this is not always reliable, but it can get at least us some of that distance in terms of getting towards that goal that we want. TikTok, as one example, is already using age estimation. They use it, for example, for live streaming. So you have to be an adult to live stream. So that is a featured based age estimation process. And we need to accept imperfect solutions as we figure out how to make the entire process better for everyone because we can't trust the social media companies really to do the right things on their own. They've shown they're not going to do that. In fact, Meta, who spent years trying to hide their own research on the harms done to young people on their platforms and who only recently have been called to account through several court cases, they're now lobbying Congress in the United States to get legal immunity from child harm court claims related to their social media platforms. So I think this is yet another sign that Meta is just not interested in doing a better job.
Yeah, again, if I can't remember who I was reading online, but the idea that we've made artificial intelligence, we can figure out these problems. We just have to get people on board to implement the solution. And the sad thing is that if Meta directed the amount of money and energy towards solving this problem instead of trying to hide the harms and avoid liability and all that, then we'd definitely be a lot closer to a solution. Uh, and the debates people are having online are so riddled with misinformation, and it's getting very sort of Trumpy Steve Bannon zero sum kind of argument stuff. And I don't know what the motivation is for it, if people are halfway brainwashed around this stuff or what they're thinking. But there are arguments that seem to be knowingly blurring the lines between the subject at hand, and in this case specifically protecting kids from social media and AI chatbots and the harms that we know they do, and other issues. And there's a great example that we've both seen in our discussion online around this, and many posters in Canada, they they will wrap their social media safety criticisms with criticisms of aspects of the contemporaneously tabled Bill C-22. The Liberals aren't doing themselves any favor by releasing all of this stuff at once, along with the AI plan and all that sort of stuff. But Bill C-22, Canada's Lawful Access Act, is absolutely richly deserves to be criticized. It has some totally unworkable aspects, like ordering tech companies to build in backdoors to their software to support access to data by law enforcement. The UK did this and got a ton of pushback. It's a very, very bad idea. So that's just one part of Bill C-22, but it's the part where there's a big, big problem. And yet it's just still not the same as the safe social media stuff. They're different arguments. They're not intended to do the same thing. They're not using the same tools. And so while everyone should definitely criticize how Carney's Liberals pushed Bill C-22 through to the Senate with without the proper debate happening, really, when it really needs to happen. They totally rushed that through to get it out before Parliament closed. It's a completely different issue from the Safe Social Media Act. So one of them is trying to help cops. There's lots of inherent issues with that. The other one is trying to keep kids safe, and that's something we all need to be able to get behind.
I think you're especially right in terms of the misinformation around this. I've even read that there are groups saying that, okay, there would be one commission to oversee all of that. That is just factually incorrect. There are a lot of details that people just, I think, haven't taken the time to dig into. And I think it's really important for all of us to step back and ask people when it comes to addressing youth digital harms the following questions. Do you agree that something needs to be done with respect to protecting kids against these harms? I hope the answer is yes, because the status quo has not been serving us well. Parents need help. And I will just say, for those people who are saying online that, okay, this is a failure of parents, let me remind you how much power these technology companies have, how much they know about what it takes to get kids hooked on their products, and how much data they are mining. So if you care about privacy, if you care about kids, let's stop blaming the parents. Yes, we play a role, but it's hard to uh, fight these big tech companies if you're just a parent trying to do the right thing.
And whatever you say about the parents need to do this, that, or the other thing, they're obviously not, or can't, or something's going wrong. So you can point at that all you want. Hey, the solution to most of our problems in the world is for everyone just to be better to one another. How do we make that happen? That's the question here. So it's a little disingenuous to be like, well, the solution is to make every parent a better parent. Good luck with that. I'd like to see that happen too, but it's really almost irrelevant at this point because we've gone through this problem long enough, and we've seen that parents are struggling to help do something about this, and so they do need the government's help.
And a second point being, if there are aspects to proposed legislation to address these harms that are totally intolerable to you, what do you think would be a better way to approach it? What are some of those solutions out there? Because it feels like we are constantly playing into the tech giants' hands by refusing to admit that there can be a solution to these issues. And heck, if they could make money off of it, they would probably already have done that. So I do really want to stress that we need ideas, we need solutions, and we need debate. And I think both of us are absolutely for those things.
Absolutely. And, that there are things to be criticized for sure. It's just we do need to do something. And there's a movement out there that doesn't want any regulation to happen because they think it's going to get in the way of some kind of progress. Well, progress at a societal level happens from the kids on up. So we need to pay attention to that. And, this age verification thing isn't going away. So it's a great project for the right type of tech company to find a great solution for. And there already are solutions out there. And, but I can't not think that if the information you're sharing is information that government already has, then maybe it should be done in conjunction with the federal governments in the countries that want to move forward. And, if people are like, oh, I don't want the government to know where I go on the internet. Again, it, that's not how it works. That's doing it wrong if they know where you are on the internet. So it has to be done without sharing that information. And trust me, we do have the technology to make that happen.
We should also say that the devil is in the details with all of this stuff. So there are definitely things to criticize here in Canada about how few details are actually being given in our Safe Social Media Act as it's currently written. But that says we have to accept that the important thing here is that there's a thoughtful and effective process to review these details as they do come into play. And it's not unusual for legislation to be introduced that points to a separate body that will determine the specifics. So we need to keep our eye on the ball as we move forward in that direction.
Absolutely. And just before we wrap up, I want to put out there that there are a few things that I think we could do that would ignore these privacy concerns, that wouldn't have any relevance to the privacy concerns, that could still move the ball forward. So, first of all, there should be no mobile phones allowed in schools. That deals with the distraction element that's so compromising learning today, but it also deals with the addictiveness issues around social media to some degree as well. Second, let's only allow phones to be sold where the operating system lets you have parental controls. And Apple's latest Worldwide Developer Conference keynote a couple weeks ago had this as a huge focus, and they had so many great features there. It's really worth checking out. Those tools are the first step to taking back some control of our kids' relationships with their phones. And then thirdly, governments need to insist on fast and effective reporting mechanisms for inappropriate online content with some very real consequences for companies that think they have better things to do than deal with damaging materials on their platforms, because they've got to be forced into doing the right thing.
I think those are all great ideas. I'm not really sure why some of these aren't already in place. And also do want to mention if the tech companies are saying that, hey, their sites are good for kids that are 13 plus, how do they plan for this verification happen anyway? They're putting themselves in a position where they're one saying it is safe for kids. So the onus should be on them to change things. Obviously seeing a bit of a sea change when it comes to the public's feelings about the harms that social media and AI chatbots can do to our most vulnerable. So it's great to see that some of those ideas move hand in hand with some carefully considered legislation that makes the companies whose products are causing these harms finally start to take these matters seriously. So please do let us know your thoughts on social media.
And coming up next, we talk to the author of a new book that makes the case for business leaders turning to democracy as their next competitive advantage.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Doug Stephens is the founder and CEO of Retail Profit and widely regarded as one of the world's foremost retail industry futurists. Amber spoke with Doug about his latest book, The Future of Competitive Advantage, a business plan to save your customers, your company, and democracy, which Doug has described as, quote, not necessarily the book the business sector asked for, but it is the one it desperately needs, end quote. Here's their conversation.
Work smarter.
Doug, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Amber.
I will say that when we were messaging on LinkedIn, you warned me that this is a different type of business book. And that got me kind of excited because I think we do need a little bit of variety out there when it comes to business books. So before we dive in to the many topics that you cover in the book, why did you decide to write a book like this?
So a number of things collided for me around 2024. And at that time, I was hearing the business sector talking principally about the same things that they'd been talking about for a decade. The same debates, the same headlines, the same conversations. And meanwhile, the world that our industry depends on was sort of coming apart at the seams. Democracy was hanging by a thread. Income and wealth polarization had reached an inflection point, and AI was set to deepen and widen that gap. An entire generation had basically been priced out of the lifestyle that their parents took for granted. And the business sector was still debating minutia. So I wanted to understand how we got here. How was it that we, as an industry, arrived at the place that we're at? And it seemed pretty clear pretty quickly that business, in conjunction with government across the political spectrum, so this was not a right versus left kind of thing, it was enabled by governments of all political stripes to take society on a continual march toward a world of haves and have-nots. And in that environment, our trust in public institutions, our faith in capitalism to raise everyone's fortunes, our investments in education were cracking. And in some places, particularly in the US, they were crumbling completely. So I wanted to chart a new path toward what the future of competitive advantage might look like, because it seemed to me that what consumers needed was not faster delivery or more cheap offshored product or an iPhone with 3 more cameras. What they needed was trust in public institutions, faith in the capitalistic system, and they needed corporations that were prepared to make genuine investments in human intelligence. And what was interesting was that when I started to scratch the veneer of those 3 things, what became immediately apparent to me is that in addition to being sort of the pillars of democracy, these things were also incredible drivers of remarkable business results. Businesses that were really relying on those 3 pillars of trust, fairness, and intelligence were outperforming across the board. So I think when I started off looking for a moral case, and what I found was a business case.
It's really interesting because I think you go into territory in this book where a lot of people would not necessarily want to go. There is this narrative out there in the business world, and I especially see this as someone who spends most of my time covering the tech industry, that we should not mix business and politics. As you would argue in the book, including even the subtitle of the book, it is absolutely critical to think about the impact that your business is going to have on society at large. And to your point, more trust actually leads to better relationships with your consumers and a better society and economy overall. So was it scary to write a book talking about some of these issues that we tend to sort of sweep under the rug?
Yeah, I mean, it was, to be honest. As we all know, it's hard to say anything these days. You can say that the sun is rising, and someone will take offense to that. From a political standpoint, it seems we live in a very charged environment, and it was a very delicate dance, and it was all the more important, really, for me to try to be disciplined in the sense of really hewing to the business case. What is the business case? So even in the book where I'm talking about the US backsliding away from democracy and into some form of authoritarianism, what people like Timothy Snyder and other experts on authoritarianism would call competitive authoritarianism. So something that looks like a democracy, it has all the trappings of a democracy, but when you dig into it a little bit, it's really not. Even discussing something like that, I had to really look at it from a business case. Is democracy good for business? And as it turns out, it is. Democracies experience more growth. They tend to be more educated. They tend to innovate at a much, much higher rate than authoritarian states do. And just looking at it from the standpoint of, some of the studies that have been done comparing authoritarian states with democracies, it's hands down. It's a very, very clear argument for preserving democracy. What I found when I started looking at the history of how we got to where we are today is that you see that a lot of the things that have been done by businesses have really been destructive forces in terms of our belief in democracy as a governing system. So we've kind of brought ourselves to a point where, wittingly or unwittingly, where we are in danger of losing Western democracy. And that's a problem for business. That's just not a problem for the voter. It's a problem for business leaders.
It's interesting because you talk a lot about trust. And I think this is especially important when we have these conversations about where we are at today, because it does feel a little bit to me like a perfect storm in terms of the fact that our media institutions, especially when it comes to journalism, are essentially being gutted. At the same time, we have large players in business who are buying up media. That's perhaps not that new, but I think it's new to the extent that they're also owning the platforms, and it's the platforms in social media where we see narrative being shaped. And you also talk in terms of politics about the fact that there are leaders such as Elon Musk, who has donated, more than $250 million, essentially to help get President Trump elected. I don't know a better way to say it than that. So we are in this perfect storm where you have these business leaders who have so much power. You have an erosion of media where all of a sudden there's a total disconnect with the truth. And you have some of these leaders shaping the truth. It is, I would argue, in some cases, in the best interest of some of these business leaders that people don't think that the businesses have any responsibilities whatsoever except to their shareholders. But that, as we see, ends up being a total disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, what we have to appreciate, and one of the things I talk about in the book briefly, is the idea that for some reason, our society has been calibrated, especially in the business sector, calibrated to believe that any criticism of capitalism is completely forbidden. Any mention of the idea that an entrepreneur may have concentrated too much power, may have too much wealth, may have too much political influence is, again, it's sort of seen as a no-fly zone, because if you say something like that, you're anti-capitalism. And that's not the case at all. I think, the fact is 99.999% of all businesses will never have the influence of Tesla. They will never have the influence of an Amazon or a Larry Ellison and Oracle. And they have to understand that these guys are not trying to change the rules for the other 99.99% of businesses out there. They are trying to change the rules for themselves, pure and simple. And they're creating, in the process, an unfair playing field for everyone else. And that doesn't promote capitalism. That does not promote a free and healthy market. It shuts it down. And that's what I really wanted to try to convince people of who are reading the book, that this is not about trying to change Jeff Bezos's mind. It's not about trying to convert Elon Musk. It's about trying to make a cogent case to every other business leader out there why they need to come together, coalesce as one entity, and stand up for democracy and for the free market.
It's an in-depth read in terms of the different parts. And one of the things I really like is that you don't leave people without solutions. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But I do want to stress that, because you're not just writing a book and saying, hey, here are all the problems that we have and good luck with that. There is talk towards the end of the book in terms of a plan of what business leaders can do. But in the middle, you talk about bankrupting capitalism and bankrupting education, which I thought was really fascinating. And I'm going to even use the word brave to get into these topics that, again, generate, so much narrative out there in terms of
who is responsible for certain things in our society. Can you talk a little bit about examples you have there? Like one that springs to mind is Costco. People may put that business in the same category as Walmart, but it is not.
Right.
Can you share some of those examples from those sections?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, Costco and Walmart are two players in the discount sector. They play at that sector from slightly different angles, of course, slightly different business models, but fundamentally they are discount retailers. Jim Senegal, who is now the chairman of Costco, was the CEO of Costco for years and years, always took the position that he would pay people more. He would pay people a fair wage. One of the companies in the U.S. that is actually paying living wages, a term that gets bounced around from time to time. And so he was paying about 40% more on average than people were making at Walmart. His benefits plan that he was offering his employees was fantastic. And the market for years beat Jim Senegal up. They said, you need to cut wages, you need to cut benefits, you need to try and drive more profitability. And his position was always that, no, you're getting this wrong. You're mistaking what I'm doing for altruism. It's not that at all. It's good business. And when you look at the business results, say over the last 15 years between Costco and Walmart, it is startling. Like Costco has 8% turnover compared to Walmart's 70% turnover. So imagine the cost of that churn on Walmart. When you look at the 15-year compounded annual growth, Costco's is 9% annually compared to Walmart's 3%. And the list goes on and on and on, all the way down the balance sheet. It is a far better business because he is treating people with a modicum of respect. People are coming to work with their dignity and leaving work with their dignity. And that makes a huge difference. So I try to provide those examples along the way so that it's not all just, you should do this because it's the right thing to do. If you're a CEO of a corporation, you have a fiduciary responsibility to be the best performing business you can be. And what I try to prove in the book is that by being a good business, you're not sacrificing, you're actually exercising a superpower.
It feels to me like the messages that you're talking about in the book and the recommendations in terms of the plans. Again, later on in the book, you talk about some things that leaders can do. It feels to me like this would have been a very normal conversation to have pre-pandemic. Many people were talking about the fact that, it's just good business sense to pay people well, treat them well, contribute to your communities at large. That was a normal conversation. And then all of a sudden the years passed since the pandemic, and it has become very controversial to have these conversations about topics that you do address in the book. I kind of have my own theories on what happened, but what is your opinion? And you do address some of this as well.
Yeah, this is actually something that came up. I wrote a book during the pandemic called Resurrecting Retail. And in that book, I interviewed a social psychologist named Sheldon Solomon, who teaches at Skidmore College in New York. And he's written books on what happens to the human mind during times of trauma. He wrote about the after effects of 9/11, the impact that had on people's behavior and indeed on their consumer behavior as well. And his position was that whenever we experience some sort of existential trauma, that we can go in one of two directions. You'll find that some people become more understanding, more benevolent, more kind, more generous. And other people will go in a completely different direction where they become more angry, more combative. They tend to, call out otherism more. We become more sensitive about the way people look or the way they act or the accent that they might have. And so he said, it's really a coin toss depending on the person that you're dealing with, which direction they're going to go in. But I think the pandemic sort of ignited a tension that was already there. And it was already there in large part for young white men, because young white men have been feeling for some time that they have been the downtrodden, that they have had their rights and their privileges and their rightful place in society taken from them, which is not the case at all. What has happened over the last 20 or 30 years is that we have seen other people actually gain more rights and more privileges and be treated more civilly. And so there's been this raw nerve. And my belief is that, yes, in addition to the stress that the pandemic created, I believe that there were forces out there that, for very political purposes, decided that that was a nerve that they could provoke and that they could ignite, and they could sort of try and harness that rage, much the way, and I talk about this in the book too, much the way Adolf Hitler ignited the rage of young white German men and weaponized that rage for his own very selfish purposes. And I think we have seen the very same thing happening over the last, say, call it 5 or 6 years in North America and in Europe.
You just reminded me, as you were walking through the situation right now, in terms of some of that anger that does exist. You reminded me of something that you wrote in the book in terms of the difference between equality and fairness. I think I have that right. And how oftentimes if you speak to business leaders about equality, they just glaze over. They're not interested in that. That's not sort of trending anymore. But the term fairness tends to continue to resonate with people. Could you just unpack that? Because I feel like that is a really important point in the book that more of us should be talking about.
Yeah, I think the term equality, is loaded, I think, for people. And not just people of means, not just wealthy people, but all of us. I think there's a connotation to equality that suggests that I have what you have. Whatever you have, I should have that too. And I think that causes a dissonance for people, and especially for CEOs, because it has all kinds of implications for the CEO of a large organization. But when you reframe it through the lens of fairness, it's not about everybody getting the same, but it is about people getting what they are rightfully owed for the contribution that they are making. And I'm of the mind that really no one in Canada, no one in the United States, no one coming from a wealthy Western nation should be working 40 hours a week and not be able to afford food and shelter. I think that is just fundamentally, abjectly unfair. And I think most people would agree with that. So the question then becomes, well, then why are so many corporations paying people wages that do not afford them even the most basic things in life? And again, to your point, it's about shareholder primacy, that from about 1980 forward, we adopted this psychology that all of the gains from productivity should be shared principally with shareholders. And if there were any crumbs left over, we could brush them off the table for our employees. And I think it's a mindset that just fundamentally has to change, because there is nothing left to extract. We are at the point, maybe AI is the last bridge of extraction, but we're at the point where there's nothing left to take. We have to start breathing life back into our societal systems, including capitalism.
We just have 1 minute left, and I don't want you to give away the entire book, but as I've referenced a couple of times, you do talk about what business leaders can do. There's a final section of the book where you talk about the plan. So we want people to get the book to read it in detail, but just, in 60 seconds or less, what are some high-level tips for business leaders who are listening to what you're saying? It's resonating. What do you do?
Well, again, it comes down to these three pillars: trust, fairness, and intelligence. And these are words that, in my experience, tend to get stuffed into, kind of the corporate base bar of every website, maybe page 52 of every earnings report or shareholder report. They're just sort of, nice sounding words that we want to have associated with our culture. But what I discovered along the way through this process, it was like 3 years of trying to understand this, is that these are not soft values. These are really hard business tactics. And when you look at the businesses who are succeeding by virtue of these pillars, there are very, very specific things that they are doing and very specific things that they do not do. And so the last part of the book is basically a 15-page business plan that says, if you want to develop trust with your consumers, your vendors, your employees, your shareholders, your communities of operation, here are the things that the hit list of things that you should be doing to drive that value. And I do that also for fairness and for collective intelligence. My objective in the whole thing was basically to provide somebody with something they could walk down the hall to their CFO and say, there, it makes sense.
Perfect. Well, listen, again, want to remind people it's called The Future of Competitive Advantage. It is such a good read for anybody out there who is interested in talking about how to do business in the world that we're in today. And like you've stressed many times in this conversation, how to ensure you're doing so in terms of being a successful business, but that does not mean that you have to leave everybody else behind. So Thank you so much, Doug, for joining me today.
Amber, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Doug and Amber. Coming up next, we talk to the company that's making the AI revolution possible one PC at a time.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
AI PCs are becoming the new standard for computing, not just a premium feature for tech enthusiasts, but AI is making everyday experiences smarter, faster, and more intuitive, from productivity and creativity to collaboration and entertainment. More AI is happening directly on the device, delivering faster performance, improved responsiveness, and enhanced privacy. And choosing an AI-ready PC today helps future-proof your investment as the next generation of AI-powered experiences continues to evolve. For more information, listen to our upcoming conversation and visit Intel online. Thanks to Intel for supporting the Amber Mac Show.
AI is showing up everywhere in how we work, we create, play, and talk to each other. And one company has built the hardware that makes all of this possible. To discuss what this means for Canadian businesses, entrepreneurs, and consumers, Caitlin Anderson, Corporate Vice President at Intel, and Asma Aziz, Country Manager at Intel Canada, joined Amber in our Toronto studio to share more. Here's their conversation.
AI Spotlight.
Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Intel has been part of the tech world for many, many years, but it feels like we are entering into a new era right now with AI. Caitlin, can you talk a little bit about this moment in time?
Yeah, we've been creating technology for decades, and that's what we do best. We create compute for the world. None of that is changing, but with AI, the demand for compute is certainly growing, and the way that compute happens is also changing. So we're developing new technologies to meet the needs of AI.
I think when you talk about AI, the thing that people think about immediately is chatbots or image generators. But there's a lot more to it than that. What would you say to the average person on this topic of AI in terms of how Intel plays a role during this revolution?
So I would say that, it's not just about the technology. I see people getting very stressed about knowing what AI is. It really is, you look at what you want to do with it and then, find a use case that works for you. And it's all about testing and trying. Do not, spend too much time understanding just the technology side of it. Really look at how does it fit in your everyday life. So for instance, let's say I want to do my work faster. Things that would take me 3 days to do, I want to do it in 3 hours maybe. So that's the outcome I want. And then I can figure out what kind of technology and what kind of softwares I would be using. So I think that is something that we should be focusing on as opposed to just the speeds and feeds.
It's a really good point because it is a broader term than I think people realize when we talk about artificial intelligence. Caitlin, when you think again about this moment in time in terms of why now for Intel in terms of this focus of AI, because AI has actually technically been around for many decades.
Yes. I think, it's really these technology inflection points, like you said, take decades. But what we really want to focus on is how we can use the adoption curve, as many people talk about. There's people that use technology right away, but then by the time it gets to the masses, it takes some time. So we've been in this game for a few years. We've been developing this technology for a few years, but it's really starting to hit the market. People are really starting to use it, and that's what excites us the most.
Let's talk about some of the milestones, for example, in terms of what milestones Intel has hit over the past few years. What are some of them that you can share with people so they understand a little bit more about the history that Intel does have when it comes to AI?
Yeah, and we're talking about AI mostly in the computer, the PC, which everybody knows Intel very well for. We actually launched our first AI PC computer chip about 3 years ago. And it's really been multiple generations. This is our third generation of that chip. And it's a really amazing experience. The software that's using our technology, the applications that use AI get to take advantage of that chip. But it's been a couple generations already and maturing even more with each generation.
We also hear the term AI everywhere all the time. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, I think what Asma said also, AI will be integrated into our everyday lives. I have a very busy life. I have a big job. I have multiple children. I want AI to be like my personal assistant, really integrated into what I do, not an individual tool or application. And that's what it will be. And then when we say AI everywhere, it just means that AI compute will happen in the data center, in the cloud, on your PC, in a lot of different places.
Asma, I would love to hear a little bit more about what's happening on this front in Canada. We have a lot of Canadian listeners. So what would you say about this moment in time here at home?
So Canadians are not different, really, Amber. We've spoken about this before as well. We have an excellent research, backbone. We have been among the top countries who have been working on AI for a long time. But for a common listener or person who's using everyday, like Caitlin said, it is going to be like a personal assistant. It's everywhere. So people are utilizing this. It's not gone are the days where we thought, oh, these are the special tasks we will do on AI. So it's not something which you put up on a pedestal and then think about it, but it's something, how do you seamlessly integrate it into your everyday? Like Caitlin said, she has multiple children and she has a big job. So she wants this to make her overall life more efficient. Maybe I'm a student. If I'm a student, I want to do my study work faster. I want to get better quality research papers. And this is where AI could help me. So I think for every user, that's why we say it's AI everywhere. So it's not for a specialized individual or a group. It's for everybody. And everybody can find out where it works best for them.
We've talked a little bit about the history of AI and the role that Intel has played, but I want to talk a little bit about the future because I think that's a space where we don't spend enough time. I don't want you to give away too many secrets, Caitlin, but when we think about what Intel is excited about in the coming months throughout 2026, what are some of those things?
Yeah, I think we're super excited to have this technology just adopt, like we said, even further, be more integrated into your everyday life. I think that computing will become much more personal. It will be context aware to the things you like, the things that you do. It will be more seamless in your everyday life. If I want to plan a trip, it knows the things I like, and makes my life much easier. So I'm very excited to see the technology continue to advance for more users, more consumers to be able to use it every day. There's a lot of opportunity also for creativity. We do a lot of work, we get things done every day, but AI will allow us also to be more creative. It's more accessible. If you're a small business owner and you want to create a new logo or edit your pictures in a very seamless way, there's lots of opportunity to leverage this technology every day.
Do you think that there are any trends that perhaps both consumers and businesses haven't really recognized or appreciated that are going to be coming in the future?
I think a lot of trends that's going to happen is I think our life will become more efficient, but also it will really open up new opportunities. The things that maybe the tasks you aren't as excited to do, that can be outsourced and be done more faster. And so you can spend more time on, like I said, creativity, thinking. We can I think a lot of consumers maybe think about AI like an individual application. I'm asking a question or I have a specific need. But like we said, that will expand a lot more to a lot more use cases over time.
What about here in Canada in terms of some of the trends when you look out into the future? What do you think people, both consumers and business leaders, should know about in terms of what to expect down the road?
No, I will just bounce off of what Caitlin said. We are just, Amber, really scratching the surface of what's possible right now. I know people are using it rightfully so in places where we want those mundane tasks or everyday things where you really don't want to use a lot of thinking. So you want to put them on AI. However, I think if I talk about businesses, they really need to make an assessment of their IT strategy for the next few years. What are the kind of outcomes do they want? Do they want employee productivity to increase? Do they want to reduce cost on their businesses on certain things? So based on that, they have to have that strategy so that, those pilots that are right now, we see them sprouting in different divisions or different parts of the businesses could be done in a more integrated manner. So that's where, you really need to think, okay, where do I need to be in the next 3 years, 2 years, and something like that. So I think that's something that the businesses can do. On the consumer front, again, I always say it's all about test and try. We are all in this learning curve. The more you try, the more you experience, the more usages you'll find. Let's think about it, Amber, when we all started using PCs, which was a couple of decades back. We thought we were just going to do these specialized tasks, sit in a separate room and do it. And today your PC comes with you everywhere. Whether it's in a cafe, whether it's at home, whether it's at a play date of your child, and on the side you're trying to crank away a few emails. So I think that is something that AI will also do, and it'll come with us everywhere. But we need to start thinking about it today. And at the consumer front, start learning.
It's interesting when we talk about consumers and business leaders, because I really do consider myself both of those things. I'm also a mom, so I appreciate the fact that I'm sitting around trying to get stuff done with my kid, who is no longer little anymore, but he's 17, and I'm still trying to focus on getting those tasks done as quickly as possible. And one of the things I've always loved to do in my career is really just demystify terms out there to help the average person understand. There is a term right now called an AI PC. What exactly is that, Caitlin, for people who maybe hear this, and why should they know about an AI PC?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's so much talk about AI today, so it can be confusing. But as I mentioned before, we actually created a very specific computer chip for your PC that can translate AI very quickly. It doesn't change your battery life or your experience on your computer. It's very power efficient, but it can take those AI tasks and make them go really fast and efficiently. So that computer chip, we call Intel Core Ultra, is built for AI. You don't have to do anything. There's nothing you need to do differently in how you work, but it's very specific for those use cases.
I think it's important for people to recognize this too, because I see this as a professional speaker when I'm out speaking to business leaders and employees, that they want to understand how to integrate AI into their day. And maybe, like you said, it's more of a seamless experience. Asma, can I ask you a little bit about some practical scenarios when we think about an AI PC? What are some of the day-to-day things that can do for you?
That's a very loaded question, Amber. Again, I'll go back to the audience and what the person is trying to do. So let's say we start off at I'm a student. Then, of course, I'm going to be using it to do my daily tasks faster, and also maybe try doing things to ask a question. Like Caitlin was mentioning that, they are asking questions all the time, getting those answers very fast with obviously reasonable amount of data that it searches through. So let's say if I'm a creative person, I could be using it to do my work faster, which could also result in more productivity, which would also result in profitability, right? So if we were trying to, and if I take your example, when you do your podcast, so you do all these cool, amazing interviews that you're doing, without or back in the day would take you a few hours to edit. But currently with AI, you could do it much faster. So maybe in a day that you could do one interview, you could do 3. So that means you're becoming much more efficient, and you can spend time doing some other things that you want to do. At the businesses, supremely important, because at the business level, profitability, productivity are very, very present conversations there. So you could utilize AI. Again, you have to not look at it as something new and different. You have to look at it, how does it seamlessly come into your existing workloads? So you're not going to try and create a newer workload where AI will work. And I think gone are the days where we thought with AI, without AI. It's almost like, I'll go back to the example of when PCs came. Initially, Caitlin and I were having this conversation about wireless and non-wireless. But now, who thinks about a non-wireless PC? I mean, it's something which is given that it's going to be in the PC. Similarly, that's how you need to look at AI, that it will not be something that you consciously look at. It'll be in the background, doing things that you want to do, but making you do those things faster, better, more efficiently.
I really love that explanation because I think it's important for people to recognize there will be a point where we're not really talking about AI because it is everywhere.
Yeah.
and I think that's important to understand. That will be the point where we're just so used to having it all around us within all of our technology. Caitlin, just one last question for you in terms of some final thoughts about Intel and where you're heading on the AI front. What should people look out for?
Yeah, it's a really exciting time for the company. I've been here 24 years, and we keep changing in terms of the technology trends, the market environment, but I feel like the ecosystem around us, technology, is all learning right now. It's a really exciting time. We're all learning together. We're trying to always develop the most latest technology to compute for AI, both in the PC and in the data center. And we're just going to continue on that journey. That is our commitment always to both design great products and build great products for the industry. So it's an exciting time. I really am looking forward to the next couple of years and what's ahead.
And if I can bring it back to Canada for a second, because I know there's going to be people who are listening or watching who are wondering, okay, where do I try out an AI PC? Yeah. How do I even get one? What should I look for? So just some final words on that.
So I would say, Amber, there's a lot of opportunity to test and try the machines. You can go to any of the retailers. They have machines available. I always encourage people to go there, try out different machines, and then find what best suits the outcomes that you're looking for. So for instance, like I said, we have multiple retailers across Canada that have those machines. We have over 100 designs that will be rolling out over the next whole year. But I would say, the closest is a Best Buy. We all know Best Buy. So you can walk into a Best Buy, talk to a Best Buy associate or a blue shirt. They're there to help you. So talk to them. I always say start with defining what do you need from your PC. See, if I'm a student and Amber, I would say you're a creative person, our needs may be very different. So start off with the need identification, spend some time there, and then choose the right machine. Another thing, Amber, I want to mention here is look for future-proof your investment. It's very important that there's headroom. And what headroom really means is, a lot of listeners have kids. When you go and buy clothes for your child, you don't buy for today and tomorrow. You try to keep a little bit of headroom that they can, grow into it for the next 3 to 6 months. Similar, PC is the same. You don't want to buy it for your today's needs because what you're doing today is because you're going to get better and better at what you're doing. So your needs are going to evolve. So keeping that headroom is supremely important. Like Caitlin mentioned, you've been saying, this AI is here. It's not coming, it's here. So please make sure that you have an AI-enabled PC. So you're not in a situation where you get a new machine and then you have to immediately go within a few months and change it. So that's important. If you want to learn more about it, you can also do it online. So you can go to intel.com or a bestbuy.ca site, and you have different machines. There are questions and answers there. Plug in your answers and it'll pop you some options, and then you hopefully go buy that and enjoy that experience.
Amazing. Well, listen, thank you both for joining me today and breaking this all down. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
AI PCs are becoming the new standard for computing, not just a premium feature for tech enthusiasts, but AI is making everyday experiences smarter, faster, and more intuitive, from productivity and creativity to collaboration and entertainment. More AI is happening directly on the device, delivering faster performance, improved responsiveness, and enhanced privacy. And choosing an AI-ready PC today helps future-proof your investment as the next generation of AI-powered experiences continues to evolve. For more information, visit Intel online. And thanks to Intel for supporting The Amber Mac Show.
And thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. As always, you can find our headlines and interview segments over on YouTube at Amber Mac, as well as getting the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening this week on SiriusXM, and we'll see you all next week.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, SiriusXM 167.